Hey everybody. I have Navisworks open here, but the window that you see is actually from Revit. So this is the Revit export uh, settings that you can get when you're exporting out an NWC. I wanted to talk about these settings and some of the more important ones to think about when you're exporting out NWCs. I'll close this real quick and then I'm gonna show you exactly what I'm talking about. So when I'm in Revit and I want to export out an NWC, usually I'll have some type of 3D view opened that usually has some things turned on, some things turned off. And then when I'm ready, I can go up to File, Export, and then NWCs. You can also access that if you jump over to the Add-ins tab and then External Tools. You'll find the export options right there. So I can go ahead and click Navisworks 2020. And then from here, you would just browse out to wherever you're placing this file. So for this example, or for what we want to do, I'm going to open up the Navisworks settings. So you'll find that right here. You can go ahead and open that. And you can export and import these settings as well. So you could look at maybe when you deploy this, configuring settings a specific way. It all depends on how you're using Navisworks. But when you're in here, you have a number of options. The one we kind of care about is the file readers, the Revit drop down right here. This will essentially give us some options of what's going to happen to NWC when it gets brought into, or when we export it, and then when we open it up in Navisworks, what we're going to see. So I won't go through all of these. They kind of pertain to things that if you are using Navisworks for renderings and stuff, you may care about lights or lights or materials and stuff. So we'll skip some of these and we'll just briefly talk about the more important ones. So the first one is converting construction parts. So if you do have construction parts in your Revit model and you want to be able to kind of use that information, maybe for instance, you're doing a 4D schedule and you have some different things broken up, then by clicking that checkbox here, it'll identify or it'll look at those items as the if they are construction parts, and then pull those out as separate items. And then convert element IDs. By defaults, all these settings are pretty good. So I would definitely leave everything at the default. But you have convert construction part, convert element parameters, convert element properties. That's off. The lights are off, but a big one is converted linked CAD files, CAD formats. In most cases, this would be checked off. I think that's an important one because what it's going to do is it's going to, when you export out an NWC, if in your view you have a CAD file, it's going to pull that information over. So if you're just dumping out maybe a mechanical view, you're going to bring in all the CAD content. So that may not be what you want it to do. So just keep that in mind when you're exporting it out. There is an option. Convert linked files. So if you're looking at some linked Revit models, then definitely be cautious on some of the views that you set up, because if they do have linked models in it, with this checkbox, it will convert those links over to an NWC when you export out the NWCs. So that's a really important one. Convert rooms as attributes. So this one is important too, I think, and it's really, in my opinion, annoying to export rooms. If you need that information, it's really useful. You can, the option's there, but I find, in my opinion, I find no use for this checkbox or for this option. It doesn't do anything but cause trouble when you're trying to run clashes, because what it does is it exports out the room, whatever that room takes up. It's going to export it as a 3D element that potentially can be clashed against with a whole bunch of other things. So there is things that you could potentially do with that, but I generally keep that off. But just know that that is an option that you can turn on and off. The coordinates, generally, I leave it as the default, but in some instances you may have to configure this if you're having some troubles when you're exporting it. So definitely check that option if they are coming in at the wrong elevations or the wrong locations. Divide files into levels. That's pretty useful because then you have that option in the selection tree. Export the current view, entire project selection. Usually I always do current view. Selection's pretty cool because if you select a variety of different elements, then it will export those selections out just like what it says. And then entire project is, if you do have a project where you just want to export everything, that's a great option. Usually though, I'll set up a Navisworks view with some type of template applied to it, a view template, and then that current view. Export. Oh, sorry. The convert room. That's a different parameter. I meant this export room geometry. So my bad. This one is very annoying because it'll bring in the rooms as geometry. It'll cause all sorts of issues if you're clashing against that stuff. But I'd love to know, how people are using that information. I feel like if I am to use anything in Navisworks, I would just do that probably in Revit itself. Maybe something to do with Clash. Maybe 4D simulation stuff. I'm not, sure, but there is that option if you need it. The faceting factor, which is kind of interesting. I think it generally is set to 1 or something like that. But I did notice on a BIM execution plan, or a BIM standards document that said they wanted the F factor to be 10 or something like that. That affects the wireframe and stuff. So or it affects the geometry itself and kind of how it's constructed when it gets exported as an NWC. And to give you an idea, I'll close this dialog window, but first there is this last option for find missing materials. So if you are working with materials, and because you can do renders and a lot of cool stuff in Navisworks, there is that option down there. So for the F factor, if we go ahead and close everything, I have this Navisworks model open. You can see here I have a set of pipes, 4 sets here, and they all kind of look different if you look close. You can see the view currently is set to wireframe, and when it's set to this, you can see the lines that make up that geometry. And if we kind of pan to the right, so I guess real quick, starting off with this one, this is F1, so this is a factor of 1 in that setting box. This is 10. This is 50, and then this is 100. Something to keep in mind is if you are doing this, it does take up a lot more because of how large. There's a lot more lines that make up this one piece of geometry, so this could have a huge impact on your model. So with that said, really the only reason that I could find that somebody would request that to be 10 when they were receiving NWCs was that it has, if you do have things like pipes being right up next to each other, there's times where, for this instance, it may not actually come up as a clash. So by setting the F factor a little bit higher, it will anytime that those lines actually interject with one another, it will clash, create a clash. But that's kind of what the difference is. It kind of just adds a little bit, adds more lines to it, pretty much, to the pipes themselves, or like in this example, the pipes. Um, and the only thing I could think of is affecting clash tests and stuff, because I have seen where some pipes and stuff, depending on how close they are, will come up as not a clash, even though technically they are a clash. So kind of interesting. But that is an option in that exports setting. So it all depends on what you're trying to do in those, in that in Navisworks. So check them out. You can, standardize those, save them, export them, and then send it. Like if you are standardizing that and requesting other people to follow those rules, you can export that out and then send it to somebody. They can import those settings. That way they don't have to configure those things and potentially mess up. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. But I wanted to share that tip. It took me a minute to figure out those settings and what's useful and what isn't. So hopefully this helped you. Let me know if you have any questions, and I appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next one.